Miami Hurricanes coming off a 5-7 season. We hope it's better next year. What do the numbers say about the returning Canes players?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, your host. I'm a University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and contributor for allhurricanes.com. And thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today on this Friday. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts, available free on YouTube. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started. I got my crew in here. I got John Garcia, Locked On Sports recruiting expert, and it's a guilty pleasure of mine after every game to check the PFF grades, and we love talking about them on the show. So we have Pro Football Focus college football analyst Max Chadwick with us, and I love, Max, how your Twitter handle is Chad Maxwick, which is like a huge brain teaser. But Max, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, it's confused. You guys aren't the first one confused by that. Maybe I'll change it in the future, but that was my nickname all throughout high school and stuff. So I thought it'd be a funny, Twitter handle because back then everyone knew me, but now, meeting awesome guys like you, everyone's kind of getting confused by the Twitter handle and calling me Chad in some interviews. So I appreciate you getting my name right, but that is completely on me, honestly. So I don't blame anyone who gets my name wrong.
Well, I find that hilarious that people may go through a whole conversation like, Chad, what do you think about this?
I'm used to it. It's my nickname. So I'm like, oh, I treat you like a high school friend of mine. But yeah, it's just now it's like a little weird. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm deceiving people a little bit.
John Garcia, how you doing on this fine Friday afternoon?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to the weekend. And as always, never a dull moment around the University of Miami. So plenty to get into.
Certainly not. And Max, I know that something that Miami Hurricanes fans have been buzzing about the last few days when it comes to returning Canes players in 2023, and maybe you can explain how Pro Football Focus came up with this. So PFF released a list of the top 5 returning college football safeties. I don't think anyone was surprised to see Kam Kinchens come in the top 5 at number 2 because he was stellar last year. Yeah. But, James Williams, to the naked eye, James Williams has been very uneven the last couple of years at Miami, and he actually made the top 5 at number 4. Explain how that came about.
Yeah, Kinchens, truthfully, I mean, I felt there are a lot of Miami fans that got mad at me for not putting him number 1, and I completely understand that. He was PFF's highest graded safety last year. He obviously was unbelievable in terms of getting, the most interceptions as well. But Kalen Bullock was a guy who played really well for 2 years. And that one was really tough. So if you're mad at me for putting Kinchens number 2, I don't blame you. I'm mad at myself, honestly, a little bit. But that was probably the toughest one. Williams at 4. It's always interesting when I rank a guy highly and fans come at me because I ranked him too high. Around. And now that was interesting when Miami fans were like, really? Like James Williams 4? I will say, first off, after the top 3 safeties, it's a mosh posh. This is probably the most wide open position. This is by far the hardest of any of the positional rankings I had to do because there were so many safeties that left for the NFL draft or graduated, and there really weren't that many like elite safeties. Whereas other positions like offensive tackle, there's a ton of guys, wide receiver, a ton of guys, running back like that. Safety was not, cornerback was another really deep one, but safety was not one of those. So James Williams is a guy that, his coverage grade has consistently been really good. But the main thing that a lot of people have pointed out, and I agree with them, run defense has been not great for 2 years now, really, and which is surprising when you see a 6'5" safety, which is a freak of nature to begin with, 224 pounds. And he's not a very good run defender. He's actually really good in coverage. So this is kind of a projection more because I think James Williams would be a really good prospect in the 2024 draft alongside Kinchens. And he's showed really good numbers in coverage as well. But you see the missed tackles and you see all that and you say, how is he a top 5 safety? And I agree with you that is an issue. But I think, he alongside Kinchens, that's the best safety duo. And also I think James Williams, the potential that he has is probably better than any other safety on this list, honestly, with the freakish tools that he has too.
Well, and John, you covered James in high school, so I'm sure you can speak to that potential. I think that a lot of people were hoping this last season, and I certainly hope it again next year, that 2023 can be the year that he puts everything together.
Yeah, he moved around a ton in high school, not only different high schools, but positionally. He was playing corner at times. He was at the line of scrimmage a ton, naturally, with that type of size, which you understand at the prep level. That's where I wanted to go with it, Max. How much projection goes into kind of the returning player concept that you guys roll out at PFF? Because obviously there's only so much you can go off of. How much are you just kind of banking on, hey, all things even, 6'5", 220 freak of nature? We'll bank on that, much like we'll see when we start talking about him at the NFL level one day.
Yeah, that was what I struggled with, and I actually put out a mock draft if everyone was eligible, and that was a lot of projection. This I really tried to say just straight up going into next year, who's the best. Now, of course, guys that have been are playing at the same level as a redshirt senior versus a guy who's as good as him as a true sophomore. Usually, I would side with the true sophomore there. So James Williams is a guy that I put above some older guys. Who have been maybe more well-rounded than him, like Rod Moore from Michigan is a guy that I really like, who's a really well-rounded safety. James Williams, I don't think is a really well-rounded safety. I think he's really good in coverage, and obviously he's a former 5-star recruit. And I'm kind of projecting, his coverage has always been really good. I'm not really too worried about that, but it's more the run defense and the missed tackles that I'm worried about. But honestly, the coverage is up there with the best of the best, in my opinion. And I think with those tools as well, and with him being potentially maybe a first round pick in next year's draft, that's kind of what pushed him so high in this list, is that I think he could become a lot better than what he's shown. And he's already shown really good signs in coverage so far.
So another Miami defensive player that I think underperformed a little bit last year, and part of it was I don't think he was given enough snaps, and that's Leonard Taylor at defensive tackle. Do you agree with that assessment, and how do you project Leonard Taylor heading into next year?
So actually, before I realized he didn't really have that many snaps, I had Leonard Taylor, I believe, second on that list. I originally had him like number 2, and then I eventually, when I went through all of the plays, I was like, oh, we didn't play that much. That's when I bumped him down to 5. But you're talking about tools. I mean, he was a former top 10 recruit, and in terms of the percentages, he was up there with the best pass rushers in college football at the defensive tackle position. He had a 19.5% pressure rate, 19.5% pass rush win rate, 16.2% pressure rate. Only Kalijah Cansey, the Pittsburgh D tackle, who could be a first-round pick, only he had better rates at both those than Leonard Taylor last year among Power 5 interior defensive linemen. So I think Leonard Taylor could be the number 1 D tackle in the 2024 draft, and I think he's just scratching the surface right now. And in terms of how efficient he was up there with the best pass rushers in the country. It's just that he didn't have enough snaps for me to put him as high as, say, number 2 on this list where I originally had him, is just because he didn't see enough playing time. But in terms of how good he was when he was on the field, he was up there with the best D tackles in the country.
What about you, John? Anything else you want to add on LT, and how might he be affected by, having some new partners there on the defensive line? Because, he and Darrell Jackson were on the field a lot together last year, and, Darrell is now a Florida State Seminole.
Yeah. The times we live in, amazing. But yeah, I was curious about that too. Are you discounted when you're more of an occasional or rotational player versus a guy who's out there for the majority of the snaps? I know certain programs want to rotate D linemen specifically more, but I didn't know if that was how much weight that carried in PFF grading, which is obviously pretty intricate.
Yeah, so the PFF grading doesn't really care about the PFF grading is just straight up how good are you when you're on the field. And that's why it could be a little misleading when you see Leonard Taylor up there with all the grade, and then all of a sudden, he has 200, 300 fewer snaps than other guys, which is why he ended up at number 5 on this list. Because if you're going straight by grading, I mean, Drazon Newton, who I think is easily the best D tackle in the country from Illinois, after him, you can make a case for Leonard Taylor. But it was because, he wasn't on the field as much as some of the other guys. And we actually have a wins above average metric that tries to kind of like the war in baseball, tries to like figure out how valuable a guy is. So when you don't play that much, even though you're grading high, you're not going to be as valuable. And he was a little bit lower on that too. So yeah, I wanted to put him in the top 5 because I think the potential, like James Williams, is unbelievable. But you just haven't seen him every single play like some of these other guys have been. So his percentage numbers, his efficiency numbers are better than basically everyone on this list, but it's just that he hasn't, been on the field for every single play like a lot of these other guys were.
So, last player I want to get your take on, it's Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus joins us here on Locked On Canes. Tyler Van Dyke, he's become very polarizing. I mean, he had a fantastic redshirt freshman year in 2021. He looked like an absolute stud in Rhett Lashley's offense. And then, Josh Gaddis came in and TVD looked a little bit like a deer in the headlights early on. And then when it finally looked like he was finding some rhythm, then he got injured. So, TVD never really got off the runway next year. What are you expecting from Tyler, and what did the numbers say about Tyler heading into 2023?
Yeah, that was a very disappointing year for sure. He didn't really grade that well for PFF, and he was a guy that going into the year, many thought he could have been a top 15, maybe even a top 10 pick, because you see those tools at 6'4", 224. He's got a cannon of a right arm. I really, really like Tyler Van Dyke heading into the year, but he just didn't show enough. He had 13 big-time throws this year, 11 turnover-worthy plays. That's way too close together, honestly, compared to last year when he had 25 and 12 big-time throws, turnover-worthy plays. So he's a guy that I think has got to take care of the ball a little bit better and then also show off that arm a little bit more. We just didn't really get to see him do it that much at Miami this year. So I'm not completely throwing him out. I'm not saying, he can't come back and be a top guy, but you, of course, have to take it with a grain of salt and say, hey, maybe he's not the top 10, top 15 pick that we thought he could be heading into this year. But we'll see, man. I mean, it is a pretty wide open quarterback class next year after Drake May and Caleb Williams. So I think after that, Quinn Ewers hasn't really shown much either. So maybe Tyler Van Dyke, he's got all the tools in the world. Miami's a very toolsy team. Basically is what the gist I'm getting to that right now. But he's a guy that I think has all the tools that could be potentially a day 1 or day 2 pick in the 2024 draft.
Wow. Well, listen, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate your time. And we got to do this again, especially with spring football around the corner. There's more players I'd like to get your take on. So make sure you guys check out Max's work, Pro Football Focus. Follow him on Twitter at not Max Chadwick, but at Chad_Maxwick. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time.
You guys are awesome. I really appreciate you.
Great stuff there from Max. And got to get a couple of recruiting notes in here with John when we come back, because we got Junior Day coming up at the University of Miami. So, man, keep it locked right here to Locked On Canes. And, folks, FanDuel Sportsbook, hopefully you're listening to this in time for the Miami Heat game coming up later. Heat are 1.5-point underdogs on the road at the Milwaukee Bucks. We're past now the midway point of the NBA season. Now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So do not miss this chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. John Garcia Jr. With us here on Locked On Canes. Now, John, I mean, that was really illuminating stuff there from Max. And, when we talk about quarterbacks, quarterback recruits has been a big topic down here in Miami. And I think the guy who probably fits the Shannon Dawson offense best is Aaron Noland in the class of 2024. We've spoken about him at length before, you and me, John. And Noland was going to visit March 4th on Junior Day, but there's going to be like 40, 45 kids here for that. He's moved his visit back to, I think, March 23rd and 24th. I love that, John, because I imagine he's going to get a lot more kind of one-on-one time with coaches.
Yeah, and obviously, a new reshuffled staff in town led by Shannon Dawson, the new offensive coordinator, and that's really what it's going to be about for him. It looks like Miami's about to get a run of their top, both local and national targets at quarterback on campus. So I think Dawson's going to be able to really dig into each of them. And obviously Noland comes with the most notoriety at this point. State champion, blue chip, top 100 guy, 4,000 passing yards. My goodness, at the high school level in 2022, rightfully so. But also along with that, heavy contenders for Prentice. Ohio State is starting to pick up momentum with him. Texas A&M is going to get him on campus for the third time, in March as well. So he's got a busy slate. Miami smack dab in the middle of it, but this isn't his first rodeo in Coral Gables either. So it really, in my opinion, will be about Shannon Dawson, because he already said, and I saw this quote today, he already said Coach Cristobal's got the best head coach relationship with him right now. So that's huge. Obviously, Mario picked up a lot of the slack throughout these changes we've seen on the offensive side of the ball. So that part looks like it worked. So now I think the ball is in the court of Coach Dawson, and that will be fascinating, right? The two have overlapped before from a recruiting standpoint, but it'll be very specific and orange and green this time around, and that'll be important for Miami, because by all indication, Alex, he wants to Noland here wants to make these visits and then start to really narrow things down. And he's never really done that. He doesn't have the list of top schools or anything like that. So it's kind of wide open. Clemson's in there. Is Arkansas a player? This thing has had a lot of fluctuation around it. So if Miami can at least solidify itself as a true contender, you put yourself in position for an official visit before a final decision comes in. And that's obviously where only 5 teams will have an opportunity with Noland going forward. So a lot on Miami for this trip, but I agree with you. Pushing it back to where it's more intimate with Dawson and other coaches will be important in this pitch to Noland, because obviously he's going to hear from a lot of programs in a short amount of time, and Miami's got to try to stand out amid the bunch.
Want to remind you guys that when John Garcia joins us, he's brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to and faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Another quarterback who's been in the news the last couple of days, Marcos, I call him Davila. I was going through a rabbit hole today, and I saw like a local news report in Texas called him Davila. So I don't know if he goes by Davila or Davila. If he comes to Miami, they will call him Davila. He's going to be Davila. It's Davila. So this player, he's I think 24/7 has him at 3 stars. He's a consensus, or he's a what do you call it? A 4-star on the composite 4-star quarterback out of Midland, Texas. I promised my listeners I'd go in a bit of a Marcos Davila rabbit hole. I did watch some of his footage today. He doesn't look like a very mobile guy, but he can move around in the pocket a little bit. I get the sense that he doesn't have the strongest arm in the world, but he does like to go deep sometimes. He was a TCU commit, decommitted from TCU this week, and Miami and Colorado, and I'm sure others are schools that are making a strong push for him. He plans to visit soon. What can you tell me about Marcos Davila?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. A guy who is kind of on the ascent, got the TCU commitment in December, and obviously they've gone through some changes as well. New offensive coordinator in Kendall Briles there in Fort Worth. Garrett Riley is over at Clemson. But the good news there in the Davila case is that Clemson looks like they're more in the Aaron Noland camp than the Davila camp. So in that regard, I think Miami's in good shape compared to some other schools in it. Purdue, Colorado, Houston, some of those that are involved right now. Even before the TCU decommitment, Marcos was planning these visits. So I do think that's important. And I like his skill set, 6'3", 215. So physically, he's progressed, compared to a lot of these 2024 quarterbacks that are out there. Very strong and dominant lower body in his frame. So in the pocket, it means control. And he has a very quick and condensed release to go along with it. So while the arm won't set the world on fire, the timing, the mechanics are very fast thereafter, which when you start to think about the air raid starts to make a lot of sense. Mike Leach won a lot of ball games with a lot of guys who weren't the most physically developed quarterbacks with the biggest and brightest arms attached to them. So I think in that regard, Marcos has a lot to be desired. And then, there's some familiarity with Miami. He's a guy who's lifelong quarterback, a bunch of trainers throughout his whole life, like built to be this type of quarterback. And he actually camped at the U I think in 8th grade. So I don't know if there's family ties down here. You know, I'll throw the stereotypical Hispanic connections out on
He
top
did
of
well.
it.
He did say something about that. Like I remember he
Yeah.
said that it would be cool to be down here because of the Hispanic community. So there is something to that.
Right, which is why it's not Davila, for sure. So yeah, I think that could be something quite interesting to focus on, especially relative to the other schools we're talking about here, right? If TCU is all the way out, compared to Colorado, compared to Purdue, Miami offers something a little different personally. So I do think that stuff has to be taken into consideration. These are human beings, right? When you're talking about fit, it goes well beyond the logo and the scheme. Although again, that does seem pretty in line with what Marcos does best. So yeah, Miami's going to have a fighting chance here. I get the sense that he's not as quick as Noland is potentially on making a decision now that he's back on the market. I think he takes his time. I think only the Purdue and Miami visits are set. Colorado, Houston, a few other ones are TBD. So that will be interesting to see play out here going forward. So it looks like Noland's going to try to hit more in short order than Marcos will. So that will be fascinating to look at between the two. But it's wide open right now for Miami in 2024 QB recruiting, to the point where I was talking to Brian Smith from All Hurricanes earlier. Maybe they take 2. Maybe that this is the class to look at something like that. Obviously, that was the plan at one point last cycle before things went crazy with Jaden Rashada. So that will be fascinating to watch in and of itself. We often look at these as an either or scenario from a quarterback recruiting standpoint. Maybe not the case with Miami. So Marcos and Air, respectively, both very much worthy of our time. And there's some other names on that list too.
When you brought up the name Jaden Rashada, you got me thinking because there was some breaking news this afternoon. This is the least surprising thing ever. For someone who's a lifelong Miami Hurricane fan going back to the 80s, the fact that Miami has become the first school to receive an NIL infraction from the NCAA, least surprising thing ever. And when John brought up Jaden Rashada, it reminded me that, okay, so in Jaden Rashada's case, the young man was allegedly offered $13.85 million from the Gator Collective, only for them to rug pull that from him. And then somehow Miami, because John Ruiz invited the Cavinder twins to his house for dinner, somehow Miami gets the first infraction. I mean, it's crazy. Like, and maybe there are other ongoing investigations. So there's some bad news and some good news, John, based on what we know about, Miami's involvement in this. First of all, the penalties are really not very severe.
Right.
And I feel bad that Katie Meyer gets in a little bit of trouble for this, because I've known Katie for 20 years, the women's basketball coach, and like she would never knowingly violate any rules. And so unfortunately, I think that she was being held responsible for this. But there's no way she knew that these were violations happening. I will stand up for Katie all day, every day. So Adam Lichtenstein from the Sun Sentinel tweeted, Hurricanes women's basketball coach Katie Meyer violated NCAA rules by facilitating impermissible contact between 2 prospects and a booster. Those are the Cavinder twins and John Ruiz. The Hurricanes women's basketball team is put on probation for 1 year. The program is fined and more. And also, it turns out it's not just the women's basketball team on probation. The Miami athletic department is on probation, which doesn't sound good. But then on the flip side of that, John, apparently, and this was detailed in Miami's statement, so they reached this settlement on this penalty with the NCAA. And according to Miami's statement, the entire athletic department was investigated, and the only violation that was found was that dinner that the Cavinder twins had at John Ruiz's house, where his mistake was posting a picture of that dinner. Don't do that again.
Yeah. Not surprised that Ruiz was attached to this as a target. He's opened himself up to that, and he knows that. So naturally, I do understand why so much attention was put into that side of the coin. But yeah, if the entire department was investigated, including football, including men's basketball, which were more kind of lightning rod relative to Ruiz at different points in the offseason, I do think that's good news for the athletic department as a whole. But yeah, look, it's the NCAA, it's Miami. It's nothing is surprising when those two get linked up together in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, not surprised it started at Miami. Won't be the last time, unfortunately. But look, this is it's the new era, right? We're all still figuring this thing out. And all this legislation has started to change already with NIL. So I do think it's going to be tough for the NCAA to now retroactively make punishments when certain elements of the NIL angle are already changed from when NIL began, I believe in July of 2021. Less than 2 years in, so many changes have already happened. So it's going to be hard to go back and retroactively punish at this point. So I do think the slap on the wrist, for lack of a better term, at Miami is some interesting precedent for everybody else, because I think it's always going to be hard to police, which was all the negative attention that NIL has created in that regard. How do you monitor it? I do think this pushes that narrative even more so, because now how do you punish something that isn't legal or wasn't legal at one point, but is at this point? So I do think that part of it will keep it as slippery a slope as NIL has been basically from the beginning. So we've made moves and there have been rulings, but I don't think much has changed perceptionally with NIL or John Ruiz for that matter. He's already kind of shrugging it off publicly, as one would imagine.
Well, and maybe like the lesson to be learned here is just don't post the photo next time. It's like, because when you hear, and John, you and I have both heard these stories over the years about how before the era of NIL, the bags being dropped at people's doors allegedly and all that. But if you work in silence, you tend to get away with more things. And even in the age of NIL, when you can do a lot of this stuff legally, because it's within the rules now, you still have to be careful about the timing and maybe don't go out of your way to post the pictures next time.
Right. Well, look, now that the NIL groups can work with the schools in the state of Florida, this is something that will create another layer of correspondence just to make sure, hey, this is what's planned. Is this cool? Yes. Oh, okay. This isn't cool. Let me not do it. So I do think, again, it's something that could have easily been avoided, but it's murky, right? All of this has been murky the entire time. So I expect none of it really going forward, because now the communication is totally wide open between the university and folks like John Ruiz. So you understand if it's a lot more careful going forward.
Well done as always, John, and huge thanks to Max for joining us as well. And guys, make sure you follow John Garcia on Twitter at John Garcia_Jr. Thank you so much for the time, John. And by the way, congratulations on being involved in Locked On Buffs, the new show. Now when you see what is his name, Kevin
Borba. Yep.
When you see Kevin Borba, tell him when he sees Deion Sanders, say he's no longer welcome down here in Miami.
Yeah. We'll wish Kevin good luck on that adventure. I try not to bring up Cormani McClain or anything like that here, but yes, it will be discussed on Locked On Buffs. So if you're inclined, certainly check it out.
Yeah, and Kevin seems like a great dude. I've been watching you guys this week, and Kevin Borba does an awesome job, and I want to welcome him to the network because, but seriously, Kevin, when you see Deion, tell him he's no longer welcome in Miami. That is a new rule, but keep doing your thing, man. So make sure you guys check out Locked On Buffs. Or to tell him Donno sent you, and make sure you check out Locked On College Basketball. For John Garcia Jr., I'm Alex Donno. We'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.